You know what really burned me up? About 6 years ago, I built a set of white oak planters for my back porch. Beautiful pieces. Dovetailed corners, raised panels, the whole 9 yards. And because they were going to live outside, I did what every magazine and every forum told me to do. I sealed them with marine-grade epoxy. 2 coats, brushed on perfect, sanded between coats, the works. Spent close to $90 on the epoxy alone. 18 months later, I noticed a hairline crack along one of the corners. Didn't think much of it. Then that winter, we got a hard freeze, and by spring I could push my thumb into the wood. The rot underneath that epoxy was worse than anything I'd ever seen on bare, untreated wood. It was like the epoxy had created a greenhouse for decay. That failure sent me down a rabbit hole, and what I found at the bottom of it was a wood preservation method that Scandinavian shipbuilders and farmers have been using for over 1,000 years. No epoxy. No plastic film. Just 3 simple ingredients mixed together into something the old-timers call boat soup. Today, I'm going to walk you through exactly what this mixture is, how to make it, how to apply it, and why it works better than epoxy for almost every outdoor wood project you'll ever build. Plus, stick around to the end, because I'll show you an end grain treatment technique I learned from a Nordic boat builder that I've never seen in a single woodworking book. Let's get into this. What we're talking about today matters to anyone who builds anything that lives outdoors. Furniture, timber frames, fence posts, garden beds, dock structures, boats, any of it. The old Scandinavian method I'm going to share with you doesn't just protect wood from water, it lets the wood breathe, flex, and age the way wood is supposed to. And once you understand the thinking behind it, you'll start questioning every can of modern sealant sitting on your shelf. So let me give you some background on where this comes from, because it's not just some folk remedy. This is proven, time-tested technology. When I started digging into traditional Scandinavian wood preservation, the first thing that struck me was the scale of it. Pine tar wasn't some niche product used by a handful of craftsmen. It was one of the most strategically important commodities in Northern Europe for centuries. The Swedish Empire built its navy with pine tar. Finland and the Baltic states exported tens of thousands of barrels of it every year during the 1700s. Every rope, every hull, every timber on those ships was treated with tar or tar-based mixtures, and those ships lasted. We're not talking about 5 or 10 years. Viking longships that have been excavated show tar residue still intact after being buried for over 1,000 years. The Oseberg ship, pulled from a burial mound in Norway in 1904, had tar-preserved timber that archaeologists could still identify and work with. But it wasn't just ships. Scandinavian farmers tarred their barns, their fences, their saunas, their log homes. In Finland, there's a saying that roughly translates to, if tar, sauna, and spirits don't cure it, the disease is fatal. That's how central tar was to daily life. And the philosophy behind it is simple and practical. Wood is not a dead material. It moves, it breathes, it absorbs and releases moisture with the seasons. The Scandinavian approach says, you don't fight that, you work with it. You feed the wood something that penetrates deep into the fibers, makes them resistant to water and fungus, but still lets them do what wood does naturally. When I first understood that, I realized my epoxy failure wasn't bad luck. It was inevitable. I had wrapped a living material in plastic and expected it to thrive. Now let me walk you through why epoxy fails the way it does, because understanding this is the foundation for everything else. Marine epoxy is essentially a 2-part plastic. When you mix it and apply it, it cures into a hard, impermeable film on the surface of the wood. And I'll be fair here. That film is incredibly tough. It's waterproof, it bonds well, and for certain structural applications like laminating a boat stem or filling a void, it's genuinely the right tool for the job. But here's the problem nobody talks about on the back of the can. That impermeable film is only as good as its weakest point. And wood moves, white oak moves, Douglas fir moves, even teak moves. Every seasonal cycle, the wood beneath that epoxy is expanding and contracting. Over time, microcracks develop in the epoxy. Sometimes you can see them, sometimes you can't. And the moment one of those cracks lets moisture behind the film, you've got a serious problem, because now that moisture is trapped. The epoxy that was keeping water out is now keeping water in. The wood can't dry. It stays wet in the dark, with no air circulation. That is the perfect environment for fungal rot. And the cruel part is, you won't know it's happening until it's too late. The surface looks fine. The epoxy still looks glossy and sealed. But underneath, the wood is turning to sponge. UV degradation accelerates this. Sunlight breaks down epoxy over time, makes it brittle, makes those microcracks open faster. Freeze-thaw cycles are even worse. Water gets into a hairline crack, freezes, expands, and forces the crack wider. Next thaw, more water gets in. Next freeze, bigger crack. Within 2 or 3 winters, you can have complete seal failure and advanced rot in wood that looked perfectly protected from the outside. That's exactly what happened to my planters, and that's exactly what traditional tar methods avoid, because tar doesn't sit on the surface, it soaks in. There's no film to crack, no seal to break. The protection is inside the wood, not on top of it. So let's talk about the core ingredient, Stockholm tar. Stockholm tar gets its name from the port city that was the primary export hub for Scandinavian pine tar for centuries. But the tar itself comes from the forests of Finland, Sweden, and the Baltic region. And the way it's made hasn't fundamentally changed in 1,000 years. You take the root stumps of old pine trees, not young trees, not the trunk wood. The stumps and roots, specifically from trees that have been dead for several years, because those roots are saturated with resin. The tree pushes resin down into its roots as it dies, concentrating it. Those resin-rich roots are stacked into a kiln, traditionally a pit dug into a hillside, and burned very slowly with restricted airflow. What drips out the bottom is pine tar. Dark, thick, and loaded with natural compounds that are antifungal, antibacterial, and hydrophobic. The chemistry is genuinely impressive. Pine tar contains phenolic compounds that actively inhibit fungal growth. It contains rosin acids that make wood fibers resist water absorption. And because it's derived from the same species of material it's being applied to, pine on pine, it has a natural compatibility with wood cell structure. It doesn't just coat the fibers, it's absorbed into them. The wood drinks it in. Now, sourcing matters. You want genuine kiln-burned Stockholm tar, not the petroleum-based imitations that some hardware stores carry. Real Stockholm tar smells like a campfire in a pine forest. The fake stuff smells like a parking lot. Brands like Austin and Clayson's are the ones I trust. You can find them online. A 1-liter can will run you about $15 to $20, and it goes a long way because you're thinning it before application. By the way, if you are enjoying learning about these shipwright methods, I put together something I think you will really appreciate. It is called Secrets of the Shipyard, and it covers 16 chapters of Viking and naval carpentry techniques that most woodworkers have never seen. 150 pages of real hands-on knowledge. You can grab your copy by scanning the QR code on screen or just use the first link in the description. All right, let us keep going. Now here's where we get to the actual recipe. Boat soup, 3 ingredients, and every single one of them earns its place in the mixture. The base recipe that I've had the best results with is equal parts Stockholm tar, raw linseed oil, and pure gum turpentine, 1 to 1 to 1 by volume. Pour them into a container, stir thoroughly, and you've got boat soup. Simple as that. But let me explain why each ingredient matters, because if you substitute the wrong thing, you'll get inferior results. Stockholm tar is your preservative and your water resistance. It's the muscle of the mixture. It's what kills fungus, repels moisture, and gives the treatment its longevity. Raw linseed oil is your penetrating agent and your flexibility. And I want to stress the word raw here. Do not use boiled linseed oil for this. Boiled linseed oil contains metallic dryers, cobalt or manganese compounds that make it cure faster and harder. That's great for a furniture finish, but it defeats the purpose of boat soup. You want the oil to stay flexible inside the wood fibers for years. Raw linseed oil cures very slowly over weeks and months, and it remains pliable. It feeds the wood. It keeps the fibers supple. Boiled linseed oil will make your mixture skin over on the surface before it has fully penetrated, which is exactly the kind of surface film behavior we're trying to avoid. Pure gum turpentine is your carrier. It thins the mixture so it can penetrate deeply into the wood grain. It evaporates after application, leaving the tar and oil behind inside the fibers. Do not substitute mineral spirits here. Mineral spirits will work in a pinch, but pure gum turpentine has a natural solvent compatibility with pine tar that mineral spirits lack. It carries the tar deeper. You can feel the difference in how the wood absorbs the mixture. For your first coat on dry, thirsty wood, I sometimes thin the mixture even further. I'll go with 1 part tar, 1 part raw linseed oil, and 2 parts turpentine. This extra thin first coat acts like a primer, opening up the wood fibers and pulling the preservative compounds as deep as possible. Second and third coats go back to the standard 1:1:1 ratio. One more thing about mixing. If you can warm the mixture gently before applying, it penetrates even better. I set my container in a bucket of hot water for about 15 minutes. You want it warm to the touch, not hot. Never heat it over an open flame. Turpentine is flammable. A hot water bath is all you need. Now, let's talk about putting this on wood, because the application is different from anything you've done with epoxy or polyurethane. First, surface preparation. With epoxy, you want a clean, sanded, dust-free surface for the film to bond to. With boat soup, you actually want the wood a little rough. A planed surface works fine, but if you've got rough-sawn timber, even better. Those open fibers and saw marks give the mixture more pathways to soak in. Don't sand to a high grit. If you must sand, stop at about 80 grit. You're not building a film. You're feeding the wood. The wood should be dry. Moisture content below 15% is ideal. If you're treating green wood or freshly milled lumber, let it air dry first. The turpentine and oil need to be able to enter the wood cells, and if those cells are already full of water, the mixture just sits on the surface. Apply with a cheap, natural bristle brush or a rag. Flood the surface. Don't brush it on thin like you're painting a wall. Lay it on heavy. Let it sit for 10 to 15 minutes and watch what happens. The wood will drink it in. You'll see the wet sheen start to dull as the mixture is absorbed. On dry softwoods like pine or cedar, the first coat can disappear in 5 minutes. On dense hardwoods like white oak, it takes longer, but it still penetrates. End grain is critical. This is where most moisture enters wood in outdoor applications, and it's where boat soup does its best work. The end grain is like a bundle of tiny straws, and it will absorb 3 to 4 times as much mixture as the face grain. Flood it. Apply, wait, apply again, wait, apply again. Keep going until the end grain stops absorbing. You might put 5 or 6 applications on end grain versus 2 or 3 on face grain. This is the most important step in the entire process, and it's the one most people rush through. Between coats, wait at least 24 hours. Longer is better. You want the turpentine to evaporate and the first coat to begin settling into the fibers before you add the next layer. 2 coats on face grain and 4 to 6 on end grain is my standard for outdoor furniture and timber frames. For anything going in direct ground contact, like fence posts, I'll do as many coats as the wood will take over the course of a week. You'll know the wood has had enough when the mixture stops soaking in and starts sitting on the surface as a wet film after 15 minutes. That's the wood telling you it's full. Wipe off any excess with a rag and let it cure. Now, let's talk about what happens over time, because this is where the real advantage shows up. Epoxy, if it survives without cracking, still degrades. UV light yellows it, clouds it, makes it chalky and brittle. Maintaining an epoxy coating means sanding back, cleaning, and recoating, which is expensive and labor-intensive. And if you've got rot under there, you're looking at a teardown. Boat soup ages gracefully. Over the first year, the surface will develop a beautiful matte patina. On lighter woods, it darkens to a warm amber brown. On already dark woods, it deepens the natural color. After 2 or 3 years of full outdoor exposure, the surface may start to look a little dry or gray. That's your signal to refresh it. And refreshing is absurdly simple. Mix up another batch, thin it a little extra, brush it on. No sanding, no stripping, no scraping. The new coat bonds chemically with the old treatment still inside the wood. You're just topping it up. For most outdoor furniture and structures, I refresh every 2 to 3 years. For something in extreme exposure, like a south-facing fence in full sun, you might do it every 18 months. Each refresh takes about 20 minutes and costs a few dollars in materials. Compare that to re-epoxying, which is a full weekend project and $50 to $100 in materials every time. Now, I want to be honest about where this method fits and where it doesn't, because I'm not here to sell you a miracle cure. Boat soup is outstanding for any outdoor wood application where you want long-term preservation without a glossy film finish appearance. Timber frames, pergolas, garden beds, outdoor furniture, fence posts, deck substructure, boat planking, dock framing, log cabin exteriors, barn wood. These are all ideal. If you're building with pine, cedar, Douglas fir, larch, or white oak for outdoor use, this is the treatment I'd reach for every time. Where epoxy still makes sense is structural laminations where you need a rigid bond, void filling in damaged wood, and any application where you specifically need a clear, glossy, waterproof surface film like a bar top or a tabletop that will have drinks set on it. Epoxy is a great adhesive and a great coating for specific jobs. It's just a terrible long-term wood preservative for outdoor exposure, and that's the role most people are misusing it for. Boat soup also won't give you a furniture-quality surface finish. It looks rustic. It looks traditional. It looks like well-loved, well-maintained working wood. If you want a smooth, polished look on outdoor furniture, this isn't your product. But if you want wood that lasts decades and ages with character, this is the answer. Let me share some patterns I've noticed over the years, things I used to do myself that this tradition handles completely differently. The first pattern is reaching for epoxy as a default anytime a project is going outdoors. I did this for years because it felt like the most protective option. It's marketed as the toughest, most waterproof product on the shelf, and in a way it is. But toughest and most protective aren't the same thing. The Scandinavian approach teaches you to think about wood preservation as feeding the wood from within, not armoring it from without. The second pattern is using boiled linseed oil instead of raw. I made this mistake on my first 3 batches of boat soup because boiled linseed oil is what I had on the shelf. The results were noticeably worse. The mixture skinned over on the surface, penetration was shallower, and within a year, the treated wood felt brittle and dry, compared to boards I later treated with raw linseed oil. The metallic dryers in boiled linseed oil work against everything this mixture is designed to do. The third pattern is applying the mixture too thick. When you first start using boat soup, your instinct is to lay it on heavy and let it build up like a finish. But this isn't a finish. It's a treatment. You want thin, penetrating coats that soak in completely. If you see a glossy film on the surface after an hour, you've applied too much. Wipe it off. The fourth pattern is neglecting end grain. I cannot say this strongly enough. End grain is where outdoor wood lives or dies. Every cut end, every exposed tenon shoulder, every post bottom needs to be saturated. Most people give end grain the same treatment as face grain, and it's the single biggest reason outdoor joints fail. The fifth pattern is expecting the treated wood to look like a finished piece of furniture. Boat soup makes wood look like wood. Gorgeous, rich, deeply colored wood, but not glossy, not smooth, not polished. If you go in expecting a showroom finish, you'll be disappointed. If you go in expecting wood that will outlast you, you'll be thrilled. The good news is, once you see these patterns for what they are, you can start shifting your approach one project at a time. Now for that bonus tip I promised at the beginning. This one I picked up from a traditional boat builder in Norway, and it changed how I treat every outdoor joint I make. When you're dealing with end grain on joinery, like the exposed shoulders of a through tenon on an outdoor timber frame, he showed me a 3-stage saturation technique. First, you thin your boat soup way down, about 1 part tar, 1 part raw linseed oil, and 4 parts turpentine, almost like water. You flood the end grain with this thin wash and let it soak in completely. This opens up the wood fibers like a primer. You let that sit for 48 hours. Then you come back with a standard 1:1:1 mix and apply 2 coats, 24 hours apart. The wood is already primed to receive the heavier mix, so it pulls it in deeper than it would have otherwise. Finally, after another 48 hours, you apply 1 coat of straight Stockholm tar, undiluted, just on the end grain and any joint shoulders. This creates a concentrated antifungal barrier right where moisture is most likely to enter the joint. That thin to thick 3-stage approach means the preservative is distributed through the full depth of the end grain, not just the first 1/4 inch. I've been doing this for about 4 years now, and the joints I've treated this way show 0 signs of moisture damage, even on pieces that sit outdoors year-round in full weather exposure. It takes patience, about a week from first coat to last, but the results speak for themselves. Now, if this kind of traditional shipwright knowledge is something you want to keep learning from, I have written a guide called Secrets of the Shipyard. It covers 16 chapters of Viking and naval carpentry techniques that have been perfected over centuries. The kind of stuff you will not find in most modern woodworking books. Scan the QR code right now or check the first link below. All right, let us continue. Thanks for sticking with me through all of this. If you've been sealing your outdoor projects with epoxy and wondering why they're failing, I hope this gives you a different path forward. Boat soup isn't new, it's just been forgotten. And sometimes, the best thing you can do in the shop is stop buying the newest product on the shelf and start listening to the people who figured this out 1,000 years ago.